Hello and welcome once again to Let's Start Cooking. I'm Wayne, and with the holidays rolling right around the corner, I start thinking about stuff that I'm going to be making. And one thing I like to make, and I haven't really showed too many people about this, is I like to make a cinnamon roll apple pie. So the first thing we're going to start with is we're going to start with the crust. And for today, we're going to use a regular pre-made pie crust, just for convenience. And all we're going to do is we're going to take the pie crust and we're going to roll it out. And we're going to take melted butter. And I used about 4 tablespoons. It doesn't really matter for this. We just want to coat our pie crust. So we're just going to take our butter and we're just going to generously butter the entire pie crust and try to stay, when you roll this up, which we're eventually going to do, we want to keep the butter away from the closest edge to you so we have a way to make sure this sticks together. We're just going to generously butter this up. Because basically what we're going to do is we're going to make cinnamon rolls out of our pie crust. So we're going to get this buttered up. And I took a mixture of cinnamon and sugar. And again, there's no real measurement. I just put about a 1/4 cup of sugar. And I put about maybe 4 or 5 tablespoons of cinnamon. And I just mixed it together. And all we're going to do is we're just going to sprinkle this all over our pie crust. Now you can make your own pie crust if you feel like it. I'm just doing this, like I said, out of convenience. And we're just going to sprinkle this all over. And all we're going to do is we're going to start from the far edge. And we're just going to start rolling this. And we're just going to roll it towards us, just like you would do when you're making cinnamon rolls. And try to keep it as tight as you can. I mean, obviously, you can only make it so tight, but we just don't want them to unroll on us. Once we get it close to the edge like this, we're just going to take a little bit of water and we're just going to run it along the edge. And this is going to help us seal the edge of this dough so it doesn't unravel on us. That's all. And once we get it to this point, we're going to keep the seam down if we can. And again, like I said, we're just going to start from the middle. And I'm just going to go about, it doesn't have to be exact, we're just going to cut right down through this dough. And we're going to make these pieces about a 1/2 inch thick. No, I wouldn't go more than a 1/2 inch because remember, this is going to be a crust and we don't want this to be too thick. And we're just going to cut right down through and we're just going to keep right on going until we get enough of these. And once we get a little bit, we're going to take our pie dish and we're just going to take these and we're going to start laying them in the bottom. And you might need more. That's why you just go little by little. And we're going to get these all on the bottom. Once you get the bottom covered, what we're going to do is we're just going to lightly start by pressing these down. And what we're going to do is we're going to thin these out and work them up to the sides. And we're just going to keep pressing, and they're going to end up connecting with each other. And you can either use your hand or you can get yourself a flat bottom cup or a glass and just start pressing down. And we're just going to keep pressing and work ourselves up to the top of the pie crust, all the way to the top. Because remember, we don't want this really thick. This is the bottom of our pie crust. Once we get it all pressed out on the bottom, we're going to slowly work it up the sides like we did, and you're going to end up with a crust that looks like this. And this way now, this is ready, and all we're going to have to do now is we're going to set this to the side and we're going to work on the filling. So let's set this aside and we'll get our apples ready. For this recipe, we're going to be using Granny Smith apples. We're going to use about 7 cups of these, which is about 7 to 8 apples. And all we're going to do is we're going to obviously wash these. We're going to peel them and core them, and then we're going to slice them. So when you do a core, I don't know how many of you have these, but if you have a core, the slices are a little bit big on this. So what you want to do is you're going to cut these slices in half when we're done. So we'll get all these peeled and cored up, and then we'll be right back. What we're going to do is we're just going to take the apple that we cored, and the slices are a little big when you use a core, so we're just going to cut them in half one more time. That's all, just to make them a little bit thinner, so we don't have really big chunks of apples. Once we have our apples peeled, cored, and sliced up the way we want, we're going to take 1 stick of butter, 8 tablespoons, and we're going to melt it in a pot. And once we get it melted, we're going to take our flour, which is 3 tablespoons, and I'll have all the ingredients in the description. And we're just going to add the flour right to our butter. And I'm gonna whisk this together. And we're gonna stir this constantly while we're doing this. But what we're doing is we're gonna let this cook a little bit to cook off that flour taste. Once we do that and we get our flour in our butter mix, we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of just water. We're gonna get that mixed up. And then we're gonna add to that, we're gonna turn our heat down a little bit. We're gonna add 1 cup of sugar. And again, we're gonna stir this constantly. And we're gonna cook this for about 3 minutes. And just keep your heat down. We don't wanna burn this. And keep this constantly moving. Once we get this to the point that we want, we just want it to melt the sugar and we don't want to burn it. That's why we keep it moving constantly. We're going to take this off the heat and we're going to get our apples and we're going to add our cinnamon, about a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of cinnamon to our apples. We're going to mix that up and then we're going to put everything together. Okay, we're just going to take our cinnamon and we're just going to add it right to our apples. And all we're going to do is we're just going to mix these up. You can do it by hand, you can do it with a spatula, whatever you prefer. Just make sure your bowl's big enough that you can mix these up pretty well because we want cinnamon on all the apples. We get this and we're just going to take our apples and we're just going to dump them right into our pie crust. Now you might have too many apples. It all depends on the size of your pie dish. That's why you use 7 to 8 apples. We want to make sure that we have enough because when this cooks down, these will shrink. So we just want to make sure we get a nice amount of apples in our apple pie. And we're just going to take our sauce and we're just going to slowly pour our sauce all over our apples. And we do this because we want this to run down all through our apples and coat every one of them. And like I said, as this cooks, this is all going to cook down. But you want to make sure you have enough apples because you don't want to finish and your pie looks like it's caved in. And the same thing that we did for the bottom, we're going to do for the top. But we're going to do it a little bit different because once we get these all rolled out and made up, we're actually going to lay them down and we're going to take a rolling pin and make a crust out of them. Once we get these rolled out, we're just going to take these and start about in the center. And we're just going to start just going around them. And all we're trying to do is make a circle big enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to put these in between 2 layers of wax paper. And we're actually going to roll this out and make a pie crust out of it. So we're just trying to get these just to give us enough. That's all. We're just going to put these together right like that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be in any specific pattern. We're just trying to get enough of them so when we roll these out we have a pie crust that's going to be big enough to cover that pie. And once we get them like that, we're just going to take our second piece of wax paper and we're just going to lay it on top and we're going to take our rolling pin and we're just going to slowly start because we don't want to push any of them out. And we're just going to start moving them together and you'll see them start to stick. And we're just going to roll them out until we get the size that we want for our top pie crust. Once we get it rolled out to about the size that we're going to need, all we're going to do, and that's why we used our wax paper, we're just going to take this now, we're going to lay it over our pie. So we'll get this laid over and we'll wrap this up. And about this time, you're going to want to preheat your oven to 425 degrees. So we'll lay this over and we'll get this closed up. We have it laid over. And like I said, all we did was just laid it over and we're just pressing the edges down. We just want to make sure that everything is covered, and we're just going to take a fork and we're just going to go along the edges. Now you could pinch it if you want. I'm just using a fork to press everything together. And I would suggest when you put this in an oven, since it is an apple pie and they do have a tendency of bubbling over, I would put a baking pan underneath this as it's baking. But we're just going to press this down. We're just going to take our knife and go right around the edge and just make sure that we don't have nothing hanging over dough-wise. Clean the edges up. And then we're going to put a couple holes in the top. We're just going to take a fork, just put a couple holes. Like I said, we don't have to go nuts. We just want something that we know it's going to be able to bubble out. We're going to stick this in the oven for about 35-40 minutes. We're going to watch it. We don't want our crust to get too dark. We just want a nice brown crust. So we'll get this in the oven for about 35-40 minutes, and we'll see as soon as it's done. It's been 45 minutes. We've left the pie cool. It's still pretty hot, but we left it cool down so at least I can pick it up and show you. But this is a cinnamon roll apple pie. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll like and share with your friends, and I hope you'll come back and see us next week. And until then, have a great day.